Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Out of the Park Development's YouTube channel. My name is Alex Murray, also known as AZ Axel, and today we're doing a tutorial about personnel coaches, your team staff, and your staff roles, and how to be able to get the most out of them for your organization. We've got quite a lot to cover in this topic, so if you've got your games open, let's jump right in. Alright, so we'll begin this tutorial on the personnel page, which you can find underneath of your team homepage, front office, and then part of your personnel tab under front office. So now we want to talk a little bit about kind of each of the different staff roles that you're going to see in an OOTP game, kind of what to look for from those staff members and what is the most important thing to have from them. And then also kind of what areas they actually are going to be assisting you in with your organization. And then lastly, we'll talk about the staff roles page, staff cohesion, and then, of course, the teaching roles as well. So let's jump right in with the assistant GM. That'll be our first one to look at this point, because as you can see on your screen, we have assistant GM, bench coach, which can also be including a manager. If you're not actually the GM and manager, it'll have a manager listed here as well. Pitching coach, hitting coach, first base and third base coach, a scouting director, and a team trainer. And then, of course, all your minors are going to have just a manager and then a pitching and hitting coach. So when we talk about the managers and pitching hitting coaches, know that that also applies to your minor leagues as well, all right? So again, we're going to start with the assistant GMs. Now, the assistant GMs do not actively play a role in your team unless you let them. Inside of your manager options page, anything listed on your team control settings as assistant GM and then the name of your assistant GM, that is where you give your assistant GM control over. So by default, you are in control of everything. So just be aware that the assistant GM is most likely than not the least important personnel in your entire team. Not to make them feel bad, but they may be the least important person on your entire team. What'll happen basically is your assistant GM's overall roster strategies, player evaluation, and trading preferences are most likely than not going to be what they will be actively participating in. It can also include their budget preferences if you give them financial budget control. But most people I have seen and most people that I end up talking to are more in favor with giving the assistant GM control over the minor leagues for promotions, relegations, and if they want to make any like player preferences or strategies, they will be more in control of that. And that is going to be the overall roster strategy. So whether or not your scout, or I'm sorry, not your scout, your assistant GM favors veterans or prospects, that's the first one here we're going to talk about. This is basically going to make sure that the people who are, if they are more in line with veterans, that means for AAA, they're going to be more inclined to throw, 30-year-olds versus the 25-year-old rookie. If they are favoring pitching or hitting, that means that they're going to be much more in favor of finding and having good pitching and good hitting as high up in the system as possible, and they're going to promote that as their go-to. And again, some of this stuff is going to be kind of more like if they go out and find somebody to sign as a free agent. This can also be in terms of that, because you have stuff like favor defense or favor offense, favoring speed, favoring power, favoring batting average, or favoring on-base percentage. So a few of these things are more in line with if they're, trying to locate a player to add to your team. This is the preference that they're going to have when they go out looking for those players. Same thing is kind of the same way with the trading strategies. This is a trade frequency slider from low to high, trade aggressiveness, low to high, player loyalty. This is just the stuff that they prefer to find in a player and what they're going to be looking for. Trading preference between rookie and veterans. So if you give your assistant GM control over the trading abilities of your team, if you're just the manager, only the manager, and you have a GM above you, then that will be an important thing to look at, because they will be in full control over trading. And you may want to make sure that you are a manager of a team that idealizes with how you want the team to be acquiring and gathering players. Because if your GM above you, who is, controlling trading, goes and trades your best player for a bunch of prospects, you're not going to like that. So making sure that you know how to understand the GM sliders and all of these preferences is going to be important to understand what they're going to do in an active role. But again, most assistant GMs are not actually in an active role. Most of the time, you're in full control. So again, they're kind of an understandable person at this point, but you're probably never going to ever see them influence stuff besides telling you what they think about a trade. So the one thing that could be done is if you get an assistant GM, make sure that they idealize exactly what you're looking to do with trading, player acquisitions. The budget preferences are kind of in line with what you want to do. If you're big into trading, make sure that their trade aggressiveness is high. If you're big on getting rookies, make sure their trading preferences towards rookies. So that way, when you go about doing those trades, your assistant GM isn't saying, I would never do this deal, when it's a clear-cut win for your team. If they idealize with what you're looking for, they're more likely to agree with you. All right? Let's talk about bench coaches, because we've talked a little bit about, technically managers are going to be all about a couple different things. So I guess we can go find that real fast. Yeah, a manager. Here we go. So managers are going to be using the strategy, overall roster strategies, again, in terms of favoring veterans or prospects, pitching, hitting, all of that stuff as well. They'll also use some of the scout tools if they've got some of those as well. There could be additional strategies if they have skill in other areas. If some managers are also really good scouts or really good scouts and assistant GMs. So there could be more sliders on this middle strategy section than just one or two. For managers, and this is where we're going to start getting into the nitty-gritty stuff at this point. So if you are not the manager of your team, you're just the GM, you're going to need to look at a couple different things for managers that you look for in hiring. Now, reputation is not the most important thing. I know for a long time people thought the reputation was like the biggest influencer in what manager to acquire. That is not the case. Reputation is simply the visible respect that the player or the personnel has from the rest of the league. Now, this is normally influenced by success and years of service. So if you've got a young rookie manager, their reputation is more likely than not going to be poor, or it's going to be low. It might be average at best, but most of the highly reputable or respected reputation managers are going to have many, many years under their belt. And this is one thing I do want to bring up. As a coach or a staff personnel person goes forward in years and experience, they can increase in skill for their abilities to do anything from handling development all the way down to teaching the in-game running, catching, defense, and all that kind of stuff. So they can get better with more time. So having an older coach or an older staff personnel is not a bad thing, because it can be an impact on their skill set that they've had that much time in the league, and they may be very good because of that skill set time frame. All right? Now, for managers, you do need to be aware of personality. Oh, and one more last thing. Reputation, if it's very high, that is more so going to indicate that the coach wants a higher salary, okay? Now, it doesn't mean they're not going to be a good or bad coach. It just simply indicates, again, the respect of the league for the person and how much they're going to be expecting to get paid because they've had success in the past. Now, again, if they've had success in the past, it probably indicates they're at least a decent manager. So take that for food for thought. Personality is going to be all about the personality of the manager at this point. That's going to be the second line underneath of ratings. Now, you're going to want to make sure that you don't get a controlling manager if you want to have control over some aspects of the team. Certain managers, when they have controlling personalities, will not give you control over certain aspects of a team. So if you get a controlling manager, they may not give you control over the lineups of the pitching staff, which could be killer for a GM who has a set plan for certain players and the manager is not playing them that way. So make sure that you are aware of whether or not your manager is going to fit your personal style of control over the team. If you're a GM and you want the manager to have full control over the team and you don't care about that, then go for it. No problem with that at all. Now, the works well with, struggles with setup, which is basically a bunch of characteristics and personality traits of the coaching staff we'll talk about a little bit later, because that's going to be part of our staff cohesion section at the end. So we'll talk about that later. So just, we'll pass by those two for right now. Manager style is going to be the type of style of the manager. Now, this, in conjunction with the personality of the manager, can be a problem depending upon I believe it's the manager style. Certain players do not work well with certain managers. Their personalities clash. Either their style of managing or their personality can become a problem, and certain free agents will not accept to be signed or even negotiate with you because your team manager clashes with their personality. All right, so make sure that you are aware that some personalities can be a stickler for some players, and you may run into that over the course of your time in OOTP. But anyways, manager style is going to be basically how the manager wants to approach their managing style. This can range from a whole bunch of different types of categories out there. I believe we have conventional, sabermetric, small ball, unorthodox, and tactical. And again, certain of these do not mesh well with certain player personalities as well. But what you can notice if you've caught on to this, you'll notice that some of these, I think in fact all of them, are strategy types as well. So if you notice that, good job, you figured it out. Basically, there's a link between the manager's traditional or strategy presets and their managerial style. And basically what that means is you can know what a manager is going to do on the overall strategy page by the manager style. By the manager style of that coach. All right? So just be aware that that is a great way to have a direct link to how that manager is going to perform on the strategies page based off of their manager style. All right? Now, managers do not need to have hitting coach focus or pitching coach focus. That's going to be for the hitting and pitching coaches that we'll talk about in a second. Handling development is one of the things that a manager needs to have a good skill at. Handling development is going to be how a manager is not improves, but helps maintain and help a player continue to thrive and obtain the most of their development that a scout believes they can get. All right? So if your scout believes that a player can earn a little bit more power, having a good handles development on the manager in the tier system that player is in, so even in the minors, that's a good thing to have. Making sure that your manager has good handles development is going to give that player the best chance at being able to develop, that'll allow the player to get the best handling of development and be able to reach the best of their potential without there being any potential negative downsides. Influencing mechanics is going to be something that you can also look at improving and having good with your managers and bench coaches. In fact, bench coaches kind of keep similar situations to managers, but they also have more that they can influence on top of it. But bench coaches and managers are going to be big on the handles development and the influence mechanics. Influence mechanics is going to be able to see about improving a player's potential. So not only reaching it with the handles development, but then potentially getting more out of their development or potential by improving or influencing the mechanics of said player. Now, that's not a guarantee. It's just simply increasing the odds and the best chance performance of a TCR change for that player, talent randomness change for that player. All right? Handles aging is going to be for aging players. I would only be worried about this with your major league managers and bench coaches. This is, again, just to help make sure that as a player ages and gets into the late 30s or even the mid 30s, that they age gracefully and not just a sudden sharp dip in their skills. If you're noticing a lot of your veterans just instantly plummet and they have really sharp drops in their abilities, you may want to look and see what your coaching staff, especially your manager and your bench coach, have in the way of handles aging. They may be low, and that might be a cause for concern. Teaching hitting and teaching pitching are all about the pitching coaches and hitting coaches. We'll talk about those in a second. So let's talk about the last 5, which is going to be in-game running and then all the teaching stuff. So for managers, none of these matter. For your bench coach, all of the bottom ones, the teach catching defense, my apologies, teach infield defense, teach outfield defense, and teach running. Those are all things that your bench coach is going to have direct influence with, all right? And allow me to explain what these do. Teach catching defense, infield defense, and outfield defense helps train players out of position to learn those new positions quicker, all right? You're going to want to make sure under your staff roles that those are assigned correctly to the coach that you want assigned to it. So we're going to jump a little bit here, and we're going to go to staff roles. And on the teaching roles section, you can see we have 4 different drop downs that we can select and be able to set up for each different coach. And we have bench coaches, first base coaches, and third base coaches. All right? And depending upon which one is the best, we put them in underneath of that category. So teach catcher, you want to make sure your best teach catcher coach is out there. And what this what it does is it basically teaches the player how to play that position. In addition to that, there is a influence on the TCR, the talent change randomness of that player in that position. So there is a chance that there is an improvement to the ability of the player potentially if you have a really good coach in that teach catcher, infield, outfield, and even running situation, all right? So while you can't exactly teach a person how to run to their potential, since everybody has their current and potential match when they are created, you can have the better influence of TCR improvements if you have a good teach running coach, all right? So there is reason to have good teach catcher, influence, outfield, and running coaches. So getting those as high as possible just gives you the best chance at being able to have improvements to your players with potential TCR changes. All right? Let's talk about the next one on the list. We talked a little bit about the bench coaches. Again, they're going to be very similar to the managers. Their reputation is the same. Personality, again, all about the manager style. They won't be an active manager, but if you do end up bringing them into your active manager position, it's good to know what they have. But they do the same thing, handles development, influence mechanics, handles aging, but they also have the teach catching, infield, outfield, and running. Managers do not influence those last 4, just so you are aware, all right? So let's talk about pitching coaches and hitting coaches. Now, both of these have their own individual ratings that are more important than anything else. For pitching coaches, it's the teach pitching rating, all right? That is the most important rating that you need from your pitching coach. That needs to be as high as possible. Second, they do get influences from the handles development, influence mechanics, handles aging. Those are minor, but they are still involved with those as well, all right? They are directly involved with just the pitchers, and for hitting coaches, it's just the hitters. Now, for pitching coaches, you have a pitching coach focus. Now, this doesn't mean that the pitching coach is only good with this style of player. So, for example, for pitching coaches, we have power pitchers, finesse pitchers, ground ballers, and neutral. Now, this does not mean that if you have finesse, they're not good at coaching power pitchers or ground ballers. It just means that their primary focus and their best ability to perform improvements to players is with the finesse pitchers, just the one that is selected. So you'll want to make sure that if you have a minor league system full of power pitchers, you may prefer to get a power pitch focused pitching coach. All right? Because that would be the best way to improve their chances at having good TCR and getting their development all the way up to what your scout believes they can get to. All right? Same thing with hitting coaches. They need to have good teach hitting. If they don't have good teach hitting, they're a terrible hitting coach. Fire them and get another one. I kid, but I also don't kid. Do that. You need that. Also, hitting coach focus is the same way. there's going to be a couple different categories: contact, power, patience, and neutral. Again, that is just what they focus on and what they're really, really, really good at. Everything else is normal. They just love to focus on one thing. And I believe if it's neutral, that means that just basically gives that focus to all of the different categories, and it's a slight boost to all of them versus no boost to a couple and then all the boost into one. So don't think that neutral is bad, but neutral is not a bad thing either. Now, again, they have handle aging, influence mechanics, and handle development as their bonuses. Those are all minor ones, but also something to just keep an eye in the back of your head that maybe you'd like to have those be as good as possible. All right, we talked a little bit about first base coaches and third base coaches. That's all about the in-game running as well as the catching, infield, outfield, and running. Now, they get in-game running. In-game running is the decision-making of the player, which is influenced by the first base and third base coaches. So what that means for the third base coach, that's sacrifice flies and turning doubles into triples, all right? If you have a really good in-game running third base coach, that's going to improve the base running skills of your players when they tag up from third and try to stretch a double into a triple, all right? For your first base coach, that's going to be getting singles into doubles. So you'll want to make sure that your in-game running is as high as possible for your first base and third base coach. They also are important in teaching the catching defense, infield defense, outfield defense, and running. So this is just giving you 2 more coaching slots to be able to get those 4 categories as high as possible. I highly recommend that you do prioritize making those as high as possible. They will benefit your team immensely, and I highly recommend that. All right, your scouting director. His ratings are very simple and easy to understand. Scouting major leagues, scouting minor leagues, international scouting, and scout amateurs, as well as a scouting preference, which we'll talk about last. Those 4 ratings, you want them all to be as high as possible. Now, there are different reasons why you'd want each one to be high, all right? All right, so let's talk about first scouting major leagues, because if you want to be building up a dynasty where you look at other teams and you want to get the best possible scouting reports of the other players in the major leagues, let's say you're trying to really win the World Series this year, it would be important to have scout major leagues as high as possible. That gives you the ability to see the advantages and the strong suits of other teams, and that will help you decide how to neutralize those. If you have updated scouting reports of all the big name teams across the league, it just gives you an advantage to be able to neutralize players, make sure your matchups are correct, and all the stuff that helps you win ball games here and now. Scouting minor leagues is going to be all about looking for prospects in other minor league systems. If somebody has a prospect who is actually developing quite nicely, but you see more potential than they do, snag that player early with good scouting reports for scout minor leagues. This is a great way to be able to build up your team without having to rely on the draft or the international free agency system to be able to get those good rookie prospects. All right? Speaking of rookie prospects, however, you can prioritize international scouting and scouting amateurs. They're both rookie prospects, basically. International scouting is going to be all about the international amateur free agency that happens in the middle of the season for standard MLB games, as well as scouting discoveries that happen over the course of the regular season. If you have a really good rated scout rating for international scouting, you will have a better chance of finding really good prospects randomly from the scouting discoveries, and you'll also get better, more accurate results of the IAFA, or the International Amateur Free Agency list, when it is released. All right? Scouting amateurs is all about the first-year player draft. How well your scout can get reports back to you as quickly as possible about the first-year player draft pool is going to be imperative to be able to draft the right people. That's going to be something that you do want to prioritize if you're going to be using the first-year player draft to get your prospects for your system. Now, let's talk about scouting preference, because this is something that a lot of people don't actually know a lot of information about, and it's imperative and it's important that we talk about this. There are 2 different sides to scouting preference. Technically, you can be neutral, which means there is no preference. But much like the the hitting coach focuses and the pitching coach focuses, this is kind of similar to that, where there really isn't a good or bad. This isn't a bad to good ratio. This isn't a good to bad scale. You have 2 different options. You can do favoring ability or favoring tools, and you can have highly favoring ability and highly favoring tool. What highly favoring ability means is that the scout is going to look at the player, get a general idea of what their potential is, and then it's going to look at their stats that they have put up over the course of their career to that date, and they're going to take into effect the statistics that they've put up to give you a more realistic potential rating of that player. And that can adjust year in and year out. As a player has a good year or a bad year, your scout's going to give you a very just a plain realistic approach to how the potential of the player looks like right now. All right? Counteract that with favoring tools. Favoring tools does not take into effect the statistics of the player. It is a fully based peak performance potential of the player. So at the end of the day, this is what your scout believes the player could get to if they perform everything perfectly and they get all of their potential. This would be the peak ability of the player. So here's how I recommend this for users. If you are rebuilding your team and you want to be able to go and get rookie prospects, you're ditching your entire squad, you're going to start over from scratch. Get a highly favored tools scouting director. That is going to be the best way for you to be able to see the full potential of players around the league. This means it'll be able to give you a clear understanding of who you should be shooting for in the first-year player draft, in the international amateur free agency section, as well as in other minor league systems, so you can see who to target and who to get. If you are in a dynasty mode, if you are winning games and you need to have a good winning team, you are more likely going to need the highly favored ability, because that's going to give you much more realistic approaches to your players. It won't let you down because a player suddenly just doesn't ever hit the performance that the other scout would have brought up. And it's going to also give you a lot better ratings on MLB players who are already playing at that point, or standard major league players at that point, who have played years and years and years in the league that you're playing in, versus, say, a potential that they may never ever get. All right? So that's going to be your scouting preference, and you can go and pick whichever one you think is best for you. That's all up to you. All right, let's finish with the team trainer, and then we'll talk about staff cohesion, since we already talked about staff roles and what those teaching roles do. So the team trainer does have a focus. They can focus on recovery. They can focus on prevention, I believe. They can also focus on balance, which is a bit of both if they want to. And I think there's also an unknown one, but I think that's just before they discover that, which I think that's something that happens over time. So trainers can be focusing on the recovery of players, past injury, or the prevention of injuries, which is basically pre-injury. And there are, again, a whole bunch of ratings at this point about what your team trainer can do. You've got rehabbing, you've also got prevent, and you've got fatigue recovery. So you've got rehabbing arm injuries, leg injuries, back injuries, and other injuries. And that's going to be good if you already have injuries on your team or they suffer an injury. Having a good rehab in the area that the person's hurt in, having that rating as a high one is going to be a good thing for your team. Preventing is the same way: arm injuries, leg injuries, back injuries, other injuries. Again, this is all about making sure they don't get injured in the first place. This is preventative measures. So if you've got a team that has a bunch of younger players who are not fragile, they're not prone to injury, prevention is going to be so much more important than rehab, because they're not known to get injuries and you don't want them to get injuries. If you have an older team that has a bunch of fragile players or even some wrecked players, you're going to want a rehab-focused trainer and recovery-focused trainer, because basically it's going to be nigh impossible to prevent their injuries from happening. But if you can rehab them faster, get them back on the field quicker, that's going to matter much more than trying to prevent an injury of a player who is already destined to have at least one or two injuries during the course of the regular season. All right? Now, last thing to talk about before we get to staff cohesion is going to be fatigue recovery. This is how quickly your team trainer is able to recover the fatigue of your team. This is vital if you don't have a whole lot of depth in your team. If you struggle to be able to give people days off, having a fatigue recovery team trainer is going to be an excellent bonus to your team. Make sure that's as high as possible, regardless if you have depth or not. You just want that as high as possible so that way you can bounce back from long stretches of games and being able to get people back on the field with a rested approach and everything. That's going to be critical. All right. Let's finish up this tutorial by going back to the staff roles page. I want to talk a little bit about staff cohesion. Now, we talked a little bit about personalities, how that can be personable, easygoing, temperamental, controlling, normal, and I think there might be one other one on there. But basically, every single staff member has a personality. They also have a works well with trait, which is one of those, and there's also a struggles with trait as well. And what you want to do is, over the course of the regular season, your staff cohesion can go up and down depending upon whether or not you're winning or you're losing, but you can also influence the staff cohesion by making sure that all of your team staff members work well with each other. If you have signed the best staff members, but they struggle with each other, it's going to bring the staff cohesion down, and it's going to influence not only your teaching roles, but it's going to influence the player development that the coaches can bring to the players. So you're actually hurting your organization as well as your current season ability to play if you don't have good staff cohesion. So while it's not hard to have good staff cohesion, it is important to note that if you notice this going down or being in the red, if this bar on the top is in the red, you may want to look at increasing that by either getting rid of some staff or making some moves to be able to get some staff that actually work well with each other. And that should cover all of the personnel topics for OOTP. I hope this video was helpful for you and helped you get started learning more about out of the park baseball. We'll continue to do more videos and tutorials just like this one down the road, so please do subscribe to this channel, and I will see you all in the next one.